Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca for another weekly chatty catch-up on everything that I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading. And it's been another struggle of a week. I had another couple days that I did not read this week, but all fine, everything is well, and things are progressing forward. So we're just continuing to plug along. This week I did finish two things. First up, I finished Bellwether by Connie Willis, and I listened to the audio narrated by Kate Redding, who is a big name in audiobooks. However, this completely caught me off guard because I have never heard her narrate with an American accent before, and this is, so it just surprised me right out of the gate. I really enjoyed this. It was my first novel by Willis. I've read some of her short work. She is well heralded in the fantasy and science fiction world. Very big name. So I was glad to finally be getting to a novel. And this is not one of her more well-known, but it certainly sold me on wanting to pick up more. So this is a sort of social satire. I think all of the science is very much grounded and not terribly speculative. I think at the time this was written in the 1990s, mid-1990s, it may have felt a bit futuristic, but this all feels very tangible to me. So we are following a character, Sandra, as she is a research sociologist, I think, at a major company called High Tech. And she is there studying the nature of fads. And clearly, to me, this seems like the beginnings of research into things like viral marketing. And that's the purpose behind why she's headed toward this topic. And she is really struggling with her research and trying to find the thread to grab onto for how a fad begins. And she's specifically looking at women cutting their hair off in the early 1900s primarily. And where did that begin? And if she can just find that, she will have the key to unlock this. And things kind of go wrong for her. So that's really the story, is this misadventure or comedy of errors in trying to understand about how things go viral, about the nature of scientific breakthroughs and research, how it's not necessarily a linear path. There are also a huge amount of tie-ins to corporate culture and poking fun at the things that management and corporations do. And I liked that. Of course, I worked for a major corporation and have for most of my career, and so I was able to very much laugh at that stuff. So I found this very, very funny, very easy to read. I think I read almost all of this combined with the audiobook in a single day last weekend. So it was great. It was super entertaining, and Willis is very well known for her sense of humor, and I think this definitely gave me a taste of that. I think one thing that may not work for some readers is this does get quite info-dumpy. So every chapter kind of starts with a short snippet of some fad that has happened. Everything from hula hooping to Barbies, things like that. So a factoid at the beginning. But throughout the chapters, our character, Sandra, is also thinking through sort of data dumps about her thoughts and her research on these historical facts. And so we do very often have her thinking through a litany of scientific research on various topics that may feel connected and sometimes may not feel connected. But I think eventually it does come together. Personally, I don't really mind those sort of info-dumpy moments. They felt natural. They felt like the character to me because she is very much a nerdy scientist. And I just loved seeing her explore this sort of office culture and the connections between people who are very different within the office, and the way those connections help us do our job, really, or prevent us from doing our job at many times. That is one aspect of the exploration of corporate culture. So this was just a fun read. It was very entertaining, and I'm so glad I finally got to one of Willis's novels. Then I picked up another long time book I wanted to pick up, and that's Laurie R. King's The Beekeeper's Apprentice. This is the first in the very lengthy Mary Russell series. This is a Sherlock Holmes pastiche where we are following Mary Russell. I think I was specifically influenced to pick this up because of Cousin from Always Doing, who reads very widely, but I think has mostly influenced me in the areas of romance, mystery, and nonfiction. And this is a mystery that is very heralded, not just in the booktube community, but in the mystery world very widely. it is a very good pastiche, I think. Feels like a serious book. And this was a surprise old lady book. That has been one of my themes this year, I think, and I did not know going in. We are in fact approached at the beginning of the book by an elderly 90-year-old Mary Russell telling us that she's going to recount her life and adventures with Sherlock. So this is very much the coming of age novel for her. We are following her starting at the very beginning as a 15-year-old out in the countryside when she runs into some hives and is very curious about those. She is a very precocious 15-year-old, a little smart for her age, more than a little smart for her age, and she runs into the Beekeeper, who suddenly she realizes is the famous Sherlock Holmes, who has retired to a manor house in the country. He is in his early 50s at this point, so we're not talking about the peak of his career. He's sort of settled down a bit, though he still has many of his vices. And this accounts for her becoming his apprentice. So he is the Beekeeper and she is the apprentice here to the title. And that's the opening of the book, so not a spoiler. So we follow them over the next several years. This runs from 15 through 19 for her. And it is following that apprenticeship where we see over that course of those years her going from very much an apprentice to someone that Holmes respects and considers a peer and equal, her going into university and taking up studies to enrich herself. And along the way, they of course have mysteries and intrigues that they get involved in. That felt a little bit, I don't know, it does build to something bigger, I would say, but it felt like we had these little bursts of intrigues throughout that felt a little disjointed. Maybe that's my one critique, I guess, on this, is that it did feel a little up and down at times. But I was so swept up in this because Mary Russell is such a dynamic character that I fell in love with right away. She's so smart and sharp. I think that sharp is the word I would use for both Russell's character and for King's writing. King is a very sharp writer where it feels like she is on all of the time, every single page. And I just love that. It really swept me up. And again, I was listening to this on audio. Jenny Sterlin is the audio narrator for this. Perfect voice for this character, I think. And the overall narration of the story just felt really on point. So I loved those aspects. The characters do all feel like such dynamic individuals that stand on their own as people, but we're getting this coherent, similar voice of our mature woman, Mary Russell, as a woman looking back on this aspect of her life. And so I'm curious to see how that will turn out as she's getting older. Some things that worked less for me about this maybe are that, or things that I foresee working less for me later on, I guess, are that Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes do have a romance or a relationship that it becomes romantic. In this particular book, there's almost nothing there. So we do, on the page, sort of see slight glances at points and moments where that mutual respect turns into signs of affection, but that's about it. And that happens when she is 18, nearly 19 at the earliest, I think, in this book. And at that point, he is in his late 50s. So that age gap, I think, kind of icks some people out. Just coming off The Woman in White, we had some massive, decades of age gap in that. And so I have to be in the mindset of the time. This is set in the early 1900s, so that wasn't too out of the ordinary, unfortunately. Also, his position of power over her, being his apprentice, that kind of causes me issues. But again, I feel like I can set it aside personally, but if you are a person who cannot set those things aside, that knowing they are going to have a massive power dynamic and age gap romance later on in the story, this may not work for you. But I did find their relationship and that sort of slow growth to a mutual respect and affection felt very natural. And they do feel like they're on a mentally even footing, which is a rarity for Holmes. So it being fiction, I'm able to move forward from that and not be overly bothered. We'll see how that goes once they are like properly into being romantic, and I think they're going to get married. And hopefully that's not a spoiler. I don't know, but I believe that is where it goes. So overall, I thought this was really fantastic. It has a couple of, minor things to it, but I very much want to continue on with this. It was such a compelling mystery. Just everything about them being these enigmatic characters, both of them, and having so many characters included who are, big names. Obviously, we're talking about references to Holmes' works that are maybe not explained entirely for a reader who's not overly familiar with Holmes. So this does kind of assume that you are a Holmes fan, at least. And if you are, I think you will probably have a very good time with it, like I did. So I think that is all for what I read this week. It was very good reading, so I have no complaints this week. As far as continuing on, I did try to read a little bit more, and I got a little farther. I'm about 100 pages in, but print reading is still a big struggle. Then I think as a result of my audiobook hold coming in for Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, that is probably where I will be going next in terms of reading. This is on my TBR for the year. It is also one of my goals to read a book by Octavia E. Butler as one of my most recommended authors. And so I'm looking forward to getting to this. This is a very well-loved, well-read book on BookTube. So I am mindful that that is not on my TBR for April, and I'm basically going to be jumping into that right before the start of April. So I'll be kicking off April with a book that is not on my TBR for the month. But I'm not too terribly worried about that. I do have audiobooks coming in for a couple of my TBR books, so I should have those lined up within the next couple of days. And I will also be hearing about BookTube Prize hopefully in the next couple days, and what my assignment is. I'm very much looking forward to that. So we will see whether that pans out as being excitement or being dread once I get my assignment. But I think that's all for my books and reading-ish stuff. In the watching realm, I did do it. I finished all the DC comic book movies. So if you're not interested, jump ahead. I will put the timestamp down below, but I do want to talk quickly about that experience of watching all of the movies. I will try and put a list up or something because there's a lot of them. So it was an interesting experience because the DC, I think more than the Marvel films, are really disparate. They are all over the place. They sometimes do not feel very connected at all. Many of them do not feel connected at all. I think the most consistent series, I guess, with sub-series within the DC movies is the Shazam films. So Shazam, Black Adam, and Shazam! Fury of Gods. So those are all very watchable, very entertaining. They don't feel overlong. I think they're, for the most part, family friendly. Like in the last one, in Fury of Gods, I noticed there was a random having a child swear out of nowhere that felt a little out of place, but I think that was, other than the violence, was the most kind of graphic, non-family friendly thing. Other than that, I think those ones were, I got behind the performances the most, I think, but then I'm just a huge fan of Zachary Levi. So other than that, the others that felt like they cohered together were the sort of Suicide Squad related ones. We had Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey, and The Suicide Squad. All of those felt pretty consistent together, but they had slightly different vibes. I don't know. Birds of Prey I liked the most. I think that one was the most, just every single point was great, whereas I had a few other issues with, like, the Suicide Squad, the first one, was, I think, a little overlong, and it spent so much of the movie introducing and just building the crew, and that felt really imbalanced. And then The Suicide Squad was great, but it felt like it was just non-stop, pure action, very in your face. It had a great comic book vibe that drew on the Birds of Prey a little bit, but it just felt so bombastic and over the top. There was a lack of balance there for me. And I think the final movies that really go together were The Batman and Joker, or in the other order, Joker and then the Bat. And those two felt like they had a very similar vibe. They felt like they were in the same world cinematically. The Batman could have been a really good film, but it was so long. It is 3 hours long. And I was a little surprised. Like, I'm not a hater on Robert Pattinson at all, but I think he did a pretty darn good job of portraying a young Bruce Wayne. He does sort of feel like the comic book character of young adult Bruce Wayne. And so I could totally see those two fitting together very well. So I think those were sort of the mental groupings that I had of them. And I think those were all pretty strong films. Everything else that I didn't talk about, so the Wonder Womans, Justice League, all of that sort of early stuff, the Batman versus Superman, just was not even close to being at the same level, I think, as the ones that I've talked about. My top 3 remain the same as what I talked about in the middle, where I really, really think that the standouts were Shazam, Birds of Prey, and Joker. And they're all completely, totally different films. So it was a really interesting journey. I loved that. I think Marvel is much more consistent, but DC here gave me that feeling that you have when you're reading a comic, and different creators have really taken the vision of the comic in a very different route. So they're depicting the same thing with a completely different style and sense of storytelling. And I got that out of these much more than I have out of Marvel. So I think they're good for different things. Yeah. Out of all of these, well, I don't know which one was my favorite. I think probably Joker, actually. It stands out from everything in that it feels very gritty and slow and bleak and very art house, but it's really performance driven. It feels like it connects a lot of backstory for many characters. And yeah, I thought it was such a well done, well crafted story. And I feel like that leading into the Batman, it almost felt like it was heading toward my personal favorite comic, which is Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth, which is a very dark, slow, grim story about Joker and Batman in the asylum, and Batman sort of being confronted with his own sanity and whether or not he is heroic, and grappling with those dark questions. And I've always enjoyed that side of the Batman story very much myself. So anyway, that was my journey through the DC movies. I cannot believe I finished it. I did miss out on a couple of films because they were not actually available on Netflix. So I didn't get to see Aquaman, and I didn't get to see whatever the animated Pets one was. So those two I missed out on. I'm okay with that. I watched more than enough of these films. So I don't know where I'm gonna go from here for movies. I want to continue on with my project this year of watching more movies because I feel like I miss out on them so much. So anyway, that is my watching ramble. Off to other stuff. I really don't have very much to talk about here. I have had a mostly quiet week. Things are still very much progressing with my home renovation, so nothing really to talk about. Thankfully, I have not had any major delays. Things are taking longer than I expected, but nothing major, and nobody has skipped out or not shown up for work. So things are continuing forward, and that's making me happy. I think that other than that, all I have are recommendations for this week. Now, I have been way behind on my watch later queue, but I'm finally starting to get caught back up again. So I have several recommendations for you as a result this week. First, I have Limitless Librarian, a relatively new channel to me, who did a wonderful video essay on the pitfalls of feminist fiction based on reading a couple of books in that area and having a couple of problems peek through from those books. Then Bask in the Story did a really fabulous list of science fiction and fantasy prizes that are out there other than the Hugos. So there has been some pretty major Hugos controversy within the past several months and last year. And so people are looking around for other prizes. And I'm usually pretty on top of that. And Bask in the Story covered a couple of prizes I hadn't even heard of. So really, really great, fantastic sharing of information there. And then finally, one I just watched today is Smitty N doing a list of reasons to read audiobooks that you might not think of. And even as someone who reads audiobooks quite a bit, and I'm heavily reliant on them right now, some of these were things I hadn't even thought of as benefits of using an audiobook. So these are not the sort of typical things that people talk about when they discuss audiobooking. So really, really enjoyed Smitty N's take on audiobooking. So I think that's it for me today. I hope you all are having a really wonderful reading week, and thank you so much for watching.